All right. So you had three conversation topics for your breakout rooms. The similarities and differences in the style of oration given by Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. The similarities and difference in the message of their speeches, and then what new understandings or revelations of Martin Luther King did you gain through the engagement of his work? Who wants to talk about what was discussed in your breakout rooms? Brianna, what was discussed in your breakout rooms?
Okay. Well, I could say that both of them talk about like kind of false promises. Cause like Malcolm X, he talked about how these politicians be coming up with false promises for black people to like vote for them. And
Mm-hmm.
then MLK was talking about how America needs to be true for what they said on paper. You
Yep.
know, like for black people, like he wants equality. He wants to fight injustice.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brianna. Who else wants to share, far as the either the similarities or differences in the message, or just new understandings of Martin Luther King that they were able to gain through engaging his material? Karina, do you want to share what your group discussed? Karina? All right, David, what was discussed in your group? David? Y'all there? Am I frozen? Emiliano, what was discussed in your group?
Hello.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I talked about the different styles of Martin Luther King versus Malcolm.
Okay.
Like Martin Luther King wanted unity, but like more of a peaceful protest wise, while Malcolm wanted more violence, like fighting what's it called, fire with fire, kind of.
Okay. Uh, is it actual violence, Emiliano, or is it rhetorical violence? Because I mean, there's no
I feel
historical
like
account, right?
yeah, rhetorical violence.
Okay. All right. So let's do this. Let's transition into my notes, and then from there, we'll go into the fishbowl. I believe the majority of you have fishbowl your two times already, but we'll we'll see where we at. Okay. So this speech was given on April 3rd, 1968. This is the last speech that Martin Luther King gave before he was assassinated. I want to say a couple days after that. So some of the themes that rang true in the speech. He's definitely about unity, right? And he's advocating for the unity among all oppressed people and also unity amongst the enslaved. And he uses the example of the Pharaoh in Egypt, um, and how the Pharaoh, when he wanted to remain control over the people, he made sure that those who were enslaved stayed divided. And Martin Luther King equates that once there's unity amongst the enslaved, that enslavement will end, right? So that's something that we have in common between the messages of Malcolm and the messages of Martin, this notion of unity within all oppressed people. Another similarity between Malcolm and Martin within their message is this notion of evolving from civil rights struggle and civil rights movement to evolving around human rights issues and human rights movements. Right? And he says there's a human rights issues facing of all people of color throughout the world. And he says Martin Luther King says we need to evolve into a human rights revolution. So that's very in line with the thinking of Malcolm X. Um, Martin Luther King is also organizing and advocating for workers' rights. So he's starting to pay more attention opposed to just focusing on racial issues. He's broadening his lens and looking at social issues as well, along with class and working rights issues. Um, and then to Brianna's point, right? He's advocating for and he's critiquing for America to live up to what they claim that they're going to say that they say they're going to be about. So what the things that you say in your Constitution, let it apply to all people, right? If you're going to say you're about liberty, justice, and the pursuit of happiness, let that be applied and applicable to all people, not just a certain segment of the population. One of the bifurcations or one of the differences between Malcolm's approach to the civil right to human rights struggle and Martin Luther King's approach, Malcolm sought to separate religion and politics. Right, he developed the Organization of Afro American Unity, and he for the political front, and then he developed Muslim Mosque Incorporated for the religious front. So he felt that they should be separated because this is just another thing for Black folks to argue about. Well, Martin Luther King feels that there should be an intersection of politics and religion, and he applauds the preachers who are engaging in the political arena. And he says that all preachers should, in fact, be engaged in the political arena. So that's vastly separate or vastly different from what from what Malcolm X is advocating for. Um, we know that he's focusing on class struggles. He develops the People's Poor movement, the Poor People's Movement, excuse me. He's focused on problems of the poor. So again, critiquing the class division within society. Um, Also within his critique of the class division, he critiques preachers who he denotes as self-serving, right? Preachers who are not going to put the good of the congregation before their needs, right? And he used the example of the Good Samaritan, and the Good Samaritan being the one who would get off of his horse to help someone who's in a less fortunate position than he is. And he likens that to what the preacher should be. He says the Good Samaritan is not concerned with how helping this individual will impact his life. He's only concerned with how helping that individual will impact the life of those of that who he's helping, right? And he says the same should be for the preacher. The preacher should not be concerned with how they can advance their situation, how they can improve their quality of life. Their focus should be placed on improving the quality of life of the congregation, right? Another similarity that you've seen between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X is their understanding of the economic power base within the Black community. Martin Luther King said at his time in 1968, the Black community's collective wealth totaled out to $30 billion, right? And he says there's only 9 nations that have more collective wealth in the Black community. And he says we should use that as a means to boycott organizations and institutions that don't serve us. One of them being Coca-Cola, right? Malcolm X also realizes the wealth in the Black dollar, but his approach to this is slightly different. It's not for Malcolm X. It's not about boycotting certain entities, but about taking that money and about taking that power, economic power base, and establishing communities for self-help, right? Lastly, for me, listening to the speech, there's an urgency in King's message. There's an urgency in King's voice. I don't think it's lost on me is the fact that it was his last speech. And if you listen attentively, Martin Luther King is talking like it's his last speech, right? I may not get there with you, right? Longevity has its place, right? He knows that the end is near, and he continues on anyway. So those are my notes for the reading. Is there anyone is there anyone who has any questions or any comments or concerns before we jump into our fishbowl? All right. Does anyone want to volunteer to fishbowl? If you have gone twice, you're good. If you got one time, then you have one more to do. If you have not gone, you need to hop on it. All right, so I'll call at random. If you've gone twice, let me know. If not, you either go or use your one pass. Karina, have you gone twice for fishbowl? Karina, have you gone twice for your fishbowl? So we're going to use this as your pass, Karina. I don't. Maybe you're having technical issues. If so, put it in the chat. But I'll use this as your one pass for the semester. Um, David, have you gone twice on your fishbowl? David, have you gone twice on your fishbowl?
Yeah, I went twice already.
Okay, thank you, man.
I have not.
Okay, Fabian, do you want to go today?
What's the question again? Sorry.
There's no question. It's just you're gonna lead the conversation for the fishbowl.
Oh no, thank you then.
So are you using? All right, we'll put that on pause for now.
I had a question. Throughout the whole semester, is it only two fishbowls that we do, or three of them?
Just two. As long as you've done two, you'll get your full participation points. All right, so I'm calling at random then. Carlos, have you done your two fishbowls already?
Yeah, I have, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Brianna, have you done your two fishbowls already?
Yeah, I did 3.
All right, thank you. Rohan, correct me if I'm wrong. You did your two already, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Gisela, have you done your two fishbowls already? Gisela, have you done your two fishbowls already? All right. Emiliano, you've done two already, haven't you? Emiliano, have you done two fishbowls already? So Fabian, if you have not gone for two fishbowls, I would suggest going now. It's really straightforward, man. All you have to do is either talk about what was discussed in your breakout rooms. You could read from your journal, or you could talk about what was mentioned in my notes right now. You have to have two of these for the semester to get full participation points. You get passed one time, and if you have used your pass, you only can do it once, and if not, next time you're called on, you have to go. Are you prepared to fishbowl today, Fabian?
I'm actually not.
Okay. So this will be your one pass for the semester, okay, Fabian?
Okay, thank you.
All right. All right. Let's see. All right. So since everyone has already fishbowled or is not responding, let's just engage in classroom conversation about the material and call it a day. Is there any thoughts about the speech? Any questions about the speech? It's open for discussion. So, pose this question: what was the greatest distinction, difference in the style that you heard between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King?
I feel like Martin Luther King's speech was more like defensive over Black people, while Malcolm X was more like he wanted to teach them like self-resilience and like self-taught. And I just feel like Martin Luther King was a better speech than his, even though they were fighting for the same thing. I just feel like Martin Luther King's speech was more better than his.
Because of what, Fabian? What do you think that gave, what distinguished Martin Luther King's speech from Malcolm?
Just like he was unifying a community, whereas I feel like Malcolm X wasn't doing that in his speech.
Okay.
Like he kind of sounded more selfish with his speech, whereas like Martin Luther King was sharing something that they were able to connect to,
Okay.
in a way.
So let's open this up to the class then. Who else would agree with Fabian in the sense that um, Martin Luther King's speech was more unifying than Malcolm X's speech.
Hello.
Yeah.
I also agree because, like, in a way, Martin Luther King was more like equality for like all races, and Malcolm was more like for just black supremacy, kind of.
Okay.
I think also what would have to do instead of like just like taking a step back from the actual speech itself, I think also the delivery and in the time period that they lived in has to do a great factor on whose speech in real time that we see it now, whose speech was better and who's more effective, you know, in the sense of vocabulary, delivery, and the target audience and what their message was trying to convey.
And I think David brings up a good point, right? So the target audience is going to vastly determine the type of speech being delivered, right? Far as the time, we know that the speech we heard from Malcolm X was 1964. We know that the speech that we heard today from Martin Luther King is 1968. So they're within the same time frame, right? About 4 years apart. Um, Now, Emiliano says that Martin Luther King's speech is more universally inclusive, right? He says it's not just about advocating for the rights of black folks, but for everyone. I would agree with that. Um, but then he says that Malcolm is advocating for a particular group, and he used the term black supremacy, which I don't know if I would use that terminology. Because what he actually says is black nationalism, right? And to me, there's a distinction between black nationalism and black supremacy. I think it's a great distinction between the two, right? And I think it's important that we understand the differences between the two. But Fabian says that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Fabian, you're saying that Martin Luther King's speech was more unifying for black folks, whereas he didn't feel the same from Malcolm X's speech. Is that correct, Fabian?
Yeah, like I feel like his speech, Martin Luther King's speech, he included other parts of like races as well in his speech,
Okay,
even though he was fighting for like his specific community.
got you. Okay, so you're saying that Malcolm X wasn't talking to any other groups besides black folks, while Martin Luther King was talking to everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, that I would agree with. I thought you were initially saying that Martin Luther King was trying to unify black folks more than Malcolm X was, and that I wasn't going to agree
Oh
with.
no.
Okay, we're on
Okay.
the same page. I agree with you. I think that um, you have to listen more attentively to hear Malcolm X talking about the unity of all groups, right?
Yeah.
Because he talks about an anti-colonial struggle. And if you are attentive to how colonialism works, you know it's not just black folks who were impacted by colonialism, right? Colonialism was in South America. Colonialism is in Asia, right? And he talks about those Asian countries, Vietnam, who's able to overthrow colonial powers. So it's there, but it's not as explicit as Martin Luther King's speech. So I would have to agree with Emiliano and Fabian in that regard. But I don't think that they're as I don't believe in their message they're as far apart as you guys are kind of making it out to be. I think they are thinking about these ideas around freedom very similarly. And I think what happens is the legend of these two individuals supersedes them, right? And you could even hear in the way that we talk about Malcolm, we want to assign this violence to him, right? Just because that fits the narrative that we always get with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King being on two opposing sides of the fence, right? But to me, if I listen to what Malcolm X is talking about in The Ballad or the Bullet, and I listen to what Martin Luther King is talking about, and I've been to the mountaintop, they're really talking about the same thing. Dead on the same thing, right? Unity amongst the enslaved of the world, anti-colonial liberation. Those are the same things. They're just said in a different way, right? Human rights issues. Malcolm X wants to go to the United Nations and take the United States to court for human rights violations. Martin Luther King is advocating for a human rights revolution. Those are the same things, right? Now, where one thing I think Martin Luther King is a little bit more focused, right? Martin Luther King is focused on the workers' rights movement. Martin Luther King is focused on the Poor People's Campaign, right? Martin Luther King is giving a speech for the sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee, right? So he's actually putting boots on the ground around class issues, to where Malcolm X is more so addressing them rhetorically, but Martin Luther King is having movements to address these issues from an organizational standpoint, right? Um, and both of them are calling for America and American politicians to be about what they say they are, right? This is why Malcolm X says black folks are politically immature, because we continue to vote for groups, and then once we get these groups in office, we're not able to cash in on our promises, right? Martin Luther King is saying, well, let's be about what you say you're about in your Constitution, right? Let's make sure that all these pretty words that you have written down on paper are translating to the life experiences of black folks as well, right? So these, again, there's a lot more similarities between Malcolm X and Martin Luther King than there were differences. Let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if you, or give me a thumbs up or something, if you heard of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Give me some type of confirmation. Thank you, Rohan. Fabian, thank you. So only Fabian and Rohan heard of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream? Carlos. So let me reverse engineer the question. How many of you heard of or read this speech before? This I Have Been to the Mountaintop. How many of you have read this speech or heard of this speech before? Not me. Okay, Brianna. No. So I'm assuming no one has read of this or heard about this before. Okay. So here's my question to you. Why is it that we're so familiar with I Have a Dream and no one's familiar or no one's heard of I've Been to the Mountaintop, which is his last speech? Why is that? Why do you think that is?
Maybe it just wasn't that important to people.
You think so? You think it's just that wasn't important?
I mean, of course it's important, but maybe people didn't see it that way. Maybe like I Have a Dream had more important like points brought up that was kind of significant that needed to be taught, I guess.
Okay. What are other thoughts? Why so much emphasis on I Have a Dream and not I've Been to the Mountaintop? Because one would argue, right, if it's somebody's last speech, that's typically like their most popular speech, especially before they die, right? If you think from a musical standpoint, like when an artist makes their transition, that album that they make before they pass is typically like their most widely recognized and respected album, right? So how is it that this one gets lost in translation all the time? Why do you think? But we know so much of I Have a Dream. Rohan, help us out.
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Okay. So let's talk about this then. What are some of the themes that you all remember from I Have a Dream? What's that speech about? Does anyone know?
Advocating for getting rid of segregation.
Mm-hmm. Right? He's dreaming about a world that's integrated, where you could hold hands and frolic down the hills, right? This is the thrust, this is the thesis of I Have a Dream. What is the thesis of this speech? What is the main argument of this speech? What is he advocating for? So in your journals, for your first entry, it should be the author's thesis. So what did you put down for the thesis of this speech? Carlos, what do you think the speech is about? I have been to the mountaintop.
Um, I would I would say like he's advocating like unity.
One more time.
He's advocating for like unity, like he uh he wants us to achieve how do I put it, Mister? Well, something about unity for sure.
You're right, but there's a specified type of unity that he's advocating for. Who could help out Carlos? What type of?
Mister, yeah, I'm lost right here.
Sorry. Emiliano, help Carlos out. What type of unity is he talking about?
What was the question?
What type of unity is Martin Luther King advocating for?
Oh, for all equality.
Okay. Of whom and how?
I feel like the reason why what's it called, that I have a dream. I feel like sorry. I feel like the speech "I Have a Dream" is more popular because it brought more different people together, like in a way. I don't know how to phrase it, but yeah.
I would argue against that, Emiliano. I would argue the opposite. I would
Why is that?
argue that this speech, though I've been to the mountaintop, brings more people together. Here's why. If you're, let me see, do you think there's more black people in the world or more poor people in the world?
Poor.
Right? So, what this speech is about is yes, unity, yes, equality, but economic equality, economic unity, right? He's advocating for the poor people's movement. He's organizing for the sanitation workers, right? So what he's talking about is a unity amongst poor. So what's the difference between I have a dream and I have been to the mountaintop? I have a dream is strictly about race and integration. I've been to the mountaintop is about reallocation of wealth, about taking money out of rich people's hands and putting it in poor people's hands. So when you want to think about America, right, and you want to think about what really makes America move, yeah, it's this thing with race. Yeah, they want to maintain their position of whiteness as the top position. Yeah, that's there. But really, what's it about is this money. And once you start talking about coming up off that money, then you run into real problems. You could talk about integration and holding hands and frolicking down hills and all that all you want to. I have no problem with that. That's cool. Once you start talking about getting my bank accounts and taking away my money, your ass gotta go. This is why I Have a Dream is so famous. And this is why no one's heard of I Have Been to the Mountaintop. I don't want to give up my cash. I could reposition the way that the society operates, and we could have an integrated society, because an integrated society does not mean that I'm losing money. Once you start talking about me losing money, then we have a problem. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Does everybody see the distinction between I have a dream and I've been to the mountaintop? Another thing that's different, I believe it was David was saying the audience, right? Who are you speaking to? For me, what stood out most about Martin Luther King's speech, listening to it, was how slow Martin Luther King spoke. Hella slow, right? If you hear Malcolm's speech, the tempo of Malcolm's speech is very quick. Where is, Malcolm X from? 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 Where is, Mal Where's Malcolm X from? What part of the United States?
New York.
New York. Thank you, Rohan. Where is Martin Luther King from? What part of the United States? The speech is delivered where? Where is the speech? I have been to the mountaintop. Where did you deliver this speech?
Isn't he from forgive me if I'm wrong. Isn't he from Atlanta?
He's from Atlanta, yes. Martin Luther King is from Atlanta, Georgia. So that's Southern, right? He's given this speech in Memphis, Tennessee. So there's a vast difference between the way that people move in New York and the way that people move in the South. In the South, everything is slow. Fast food is slow, right? In the North, everything moves quickly, right? So it's very plausible that if Martin Luther King would go to New York speaking as slow as he likes to speak, motherfuckers gonna get bored. They're gonna tune that out really quickly, right? Just as Malcolm X may have problems going down south and speaking with this pace of speech. They may not be accustomed to that, right? So when David talks about your audience, he's absolutely right. And it's another thing to think about when you're reading, right? You have to think who is the author's audience, because that can dictate what they're trying to say and what the message that they're trying to get off. Rohan, did you want to add something?
Oh no, sorry. I just forgot to turn off my mic.
All good, all good. Um, any other comments or questions about the speeches? So, Carlos, out of Malcolm X's style of speech, it's not about the message right now, it's just about the style. Which style it spoke to you more? Which style did you more, or you find yourself more attracted to?
I find myself more attracted to Martin Luther King or MLK's style because well, the reason is well, I like the way he approached things, with non-violent movements and his like message of love and justice.
Okay. David, whose style spoke more to you, MLK or Malcolm? David Castillo, we waiting on you, sir.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, whose style?
You could cut it off. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Whose style of speech do you relate more to, Malcolm X or Martin Luther King?
I think I relate to Martin Luther King more, to the simple fact that with the events that's going on now, you look at both speeches and we see that Martin Luther King is more relatable. If you were to give that speech, if we put both speeches into present day now, I feel like Martin Luther King's speech would have more of an effect on the world as a whole than Malcolm X's speech.
I would agree. Rohan, who speaks more to you, Martin Luther King or Malcolm X?
To be honest,
Please.
I would say, to be honest, I would say, I don't really have enough like experience listening to each of them speak because even though I've watched, of course I've watched the I Have a Dream speech, and I've read some work of, uh, I've read some work from. Um, sorry, I'm really tired right now. Malcolm X. There you go. I've read some work of Malcolm X, and I've seen the contrast in their messages. But I feel like they don't really they cater to the same audience just from a different angle. So that's why I don't really have a strong opinion about like who resonates with me more.
So,
Because I think I can kind of see both of their messages from different angles.
but think about it this way, Rohan, not what they're saying, but how they're saying. Let's focus on style, right? So, don't think about what the message is. Think about how that message is delivered, right? And which message speaks to you more. Or sorry, which method speaks to you more.
I guess if I had to decide, I would say Malcolm X because he seemed more like direct about what he believed needed to be done, and I respect that.
Okay, bet. Thank you. Gisela, whose style of speech giving speaks to you more, Malcolm X or Martin Luther King? Why MLK, Gisela? More people. So again, tropes and narratives, right? So somebody please tell me where Malcolm X enacted violence. Historically, where has that happened? I read all of the shit about Malcolm X. I read the autobiography numerous times. I've read Murray Marble's texts about him numerous times. Um, Never, not once, has they mentioned him being violent, right? So this idea and this trope of one being violent and one being non-violent, there's no real basis for that outside of this is something that we've been conditioned to believe. And I want us to move beyond that, right? Fabian, whose style of speech giving resonated with you more?
To say Martin Luther King because his speech was more convincing to his audience. And at the end of the day, you're giving a speech, so your speech has to sound more convincing than the other. And I would always go to Martin Luther King.
Okay. Emiliano, who do you resonate with more?
Me personally, I feel like Martin Luther King just
You broke up there. You feel like Martin Luther King is why? All right, we lost Emiliano. All right, that's fair, right? No one's opinion is wrong, but I prod you guys to be more critical as to why you feel that one is more peaceful than the other, right? Why is one's message more widely acceptable than the other? And then two, going back to what Emiliano says in the space of audience, right? If we're talking to black folks about their situation, right? What's message or what style of message is going to be more acceptable, right? What made Malcolm X so popular is the fact that he was direct, is the fact that he didn't show the patience that Martin Luther King and a lot of the other civil rights movement people exhibited, right? He wasn't violent, no. But at the same time, he wasn't telling you to go and get your head punched in. And if you research historically, another reason why Malcolm X became so popular is because people got tired of the nonviolent message of Martin Luther King. And as you see, another way to determine what was more widely accepted by black folks is to study what happens after Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Again, another way to think about what was more widely accepted by black folks in comparison of messages and style of messages, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, is to study what happens directly after Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And if you are to take the black experience and look at it from a genealogical standpoint, right? Directly preceding the death of Malcolm X and the death of Martin Luther King is the birth of the Black Power era, right? That nonviolent shit is gone. And you hear the language go from nonviolence to self-defense, right? Articulated by Malcolm X, to outright offense with the power structure through the language and literature of the black people like the Black Panther Party. So I would argue, right, from a historical standpoint, the message of Malcolm X resonated more with the black folks nationwide and globally than the message of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King's message was very spatially oriented to the South, right? Because also one thing to think about with Martin Luther King, his message was very much tied to religion. And for those who were outside of the Christian faith, you weren't so willing to listen to these messages that Martin Luther King was giving, right? So this also gave Malcolm X a broader appeal. Think about who they were as people, right? Martin Luther King's a reverend. Martin Luther King's a doctor. He has his Ph.D., right? So that speaks to a certain class of people, okay? A class of people who go to church and a class of people who are highly educated. Black folks, right? Who's Malcolm X, or who Malcolm X formerly was? Detroit Red. Pimp, hustler, robber, right? So that allows him to speak to a certain segment of the population also. He didn't go to school. He doesn't have a college education, right? Let me ask you, in the 1960s, in the 1950s, in the 1940s, were there more black folks in the streets, or were there more black folks in college? Somebody give me an answer. Say it out loud for me, Emiliano.
Streets.
They were in the streets. Very few African people were receiving higher education degrees, right? Yeah, we was in a church, but very few were in the universities. The conditions of black folks forced the majority of them in the streets, right? Just like it's going on today. So when you talk about who had the majority of black folks' ear, one would have to argue it would be Malcolm X. All right, so for next week,